Vikings fans. This is Morning Joe's, brought to you by, and get ready for it, Grey Duck Vodka, Minnesota's premier vodka, Total Sports Entertainment, Minnesota's premier memorabilia company for the Minnesota Vikings and Minnesota Twins, and last but not least, Ticket Club. I'm Joe Johnson, your host, owner of PurplePTSD.com, VikingsTerritory.com, and PurpleTerritoryRadio.com, here with Mr. Joe Oberle, the editor of the Purple Territory Network, I think is the easiest way to say it. I think that's the brand we'll go with moving forward.
I'm just editor of everything. I walk down the street editing things. I people, hey, change that lawn thing out in front. Get that gnome out of here. Hey, so I'm just your roving editor. Stand.
Signs on telephone poles, just always out there.
Got to edit.
Yeah, man, it's in your blood. How you doing? How you weathering the first week of the Vikings news desert?
It's the abyss, ain't it? It's. I'm surprised we're on the air talking since it is the abyss. But hey, we can talk about anything. Just say Vikings, say purple, and we'll be here spewing
pretty
opinions.
Much. We're taking advantage a little bit of. The show seems to be picking up steam, especially on those that have been listening to us on iHeartRadio. So we really do appreciate that as we've been doing this show. Joe and I have been working together on a podcast of one sort or another for years now. This is the third show that we've done together, and
we do them remotely, so we never have a chance to kill each other in the process.
Much. We need at least 15 miles of buffers. We're like Wolverines, the territory needs to be at least 20 miles in every direction. But there has been some news. I mean, today's show, I'm coming from the world's worst salesman here, isn't going to have a whole bunch of earth-shattering stuff, but there's stuff going on per usual. There's a lot of I think this time of year really is the time of year where you get a lot of wacky takes and weird opinions, both on a local level and nationally. And so I think the first thing that caught my eye, at least yesterday, that was reported a little bit last night, maybe some people missed it that are checking things this morning from work or whatever, but that Florio on his show basically came up with a scenario in which the Vikings and 49ers...
Clickbait.
What?
Clickbait.
Oh, God, yeah.
Go ahead.
Or viewer bait, or whatever you call it for a show, I guess. The Vikings would trade Kirk Cousins to the 49ers after the 2019 season, assuming multiple things go terribly wrong. And some of these takes are just what I described them as, or what you described them as clickbait or filler. It's a lot of people. My pet peeve with people is really in any debates or conversation is, well, it's my opinion and you have an opinion, but I feel like a lot of opinions or at least should be rooted in some sort of fact, and I just don't see how, even if, let's say, the 49ers have a terrible year and the Vikings have a terrible year, I could see maybe the Vikings wanting to unload that contract for 2020, but I can't imagine the 49ers, especially with the way last season went and Garoppolo being injured, even if he comes back this year, there'll be a lot of people saying, well, he started slow because of his knee or so on and so forth. So I just can't imagine a scenario in which they would blow up what they put together last year with the head coach and bringing in Jerick McKinnon and Garoppolo and the big contract he got after one bad year, since last year it was kind of a wash. That would blow my mind.
Well, I guess I'm reminded of what I think may be a Wayne's World quote, and monkeys might fly out my, know what.
Most underrated comedy of all time, by the way. That movie. I love that movie.
It totally is. Someone's got to come in on Monday morning, and your assignment is, we need someone to be here and see our site and click on it.
Yeah.
So you got to gin something up, because if there were quotations, if there were some not rumors, but actual people talking about this, I mean, you could postulate any scenario and say if Aaron Rodgers, has cream cheese on his bagel instead of butter on Monday, he might end up a Viking next year. I mean, go ahead and say whatever you want. I
actually like that take.
I mean, there's talk over there about there's trouble in paradise between him and the new coach LaFleur already, and it's the same thing. As far as he was going to take away his I heard some take or some rumor where they were going to take away his red zone offense or something like that. I have no idea. I didn't even look into it because it's silly. They're going to work out stuff, and people are just throwing this stuff out there. I guess I have stopped reading Florio in the past, and I'm sorry to see if that's what he's resorting to, because there's just no way. They're in, unless, Kirk Cousins is the reason that the Vikings, after all they've put into this current roster, both on the coaching staff and on the field, and how they've improved the offensive line, they look like they've bolstered the running game after losing Latavius Murray. They look like they still haven't got a wide receivers set, but they're set at where they're at. They've got a nice tight end combo that they could work with. They've kept their guys on defense. I mean, they are all in, and they are ready to go after it this season. Now, if it completely falls apart and they end up with a 4-12 record, then you got to start looking around. Then you maybe have, and it's the quarterback's fault. Fine. Yeah. But, they say this without, postulating what the Vikings would do. Oh, they're going to trade Cousins, and then, and stop and have Mannion and Floater and Browning as your quarterback. Stop. Stop.
But then if that was the case, why would the 49ers want Cousins and his contract if he was that bad? Outside of the Shanahan connection, which would still be a moot point because he would have to be bad enough to be moved. But his contract would be so massive, nobody would want him beyond that. And I have seen some Vikings fans, we kind of touched on this like a month ago, that have postulated on Twitter that, the 2019's win-win because either they make the playoffs and are good, or if they don't make the playoffs, they'll be bad enough to have a top 3 pick, and then they'll get a quarterback, and then Cousins can train that quarterback. So you get all these weird scenarios that aren't really based on a whole... I mean, that's a little more realistic, but yeah...
that's what it's based on, Joe, is that connection that they once had between Shanahan and Cousins. Yeah. So they're not together. Let's put them together. Oh, this makes sense. Okay, well, I'll write that. And I won't say that I've never written anything facetious, but I've made it quite known in the tone and what I say that it's facetious. Yeah. I'm not out there saying this could happen if the moon turns green, but it's just bizarre. I don't put any credence to it. I think they're in. You can't keep changing your quarterbacks and expect to improve. You can't build all this team around a certain quarterback and what you're hoping to do with your offense and your defense, and then you say, oh, well, okay, let's go get another quarterback. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense.
And I think that
Zimmer's not that kind of guy.
No, and I think the Vikings, a lot of people, and I was on doing the Scoop show again this morning on KLGR Radio in Redwood Falls, and if you want to check that out, it'll be posted probably around 3 o'clock today. I was on there last week, and you can just see it on our social media. But I also talked about Cousins a lot, and the article by Realistic Randy, which was a facetious article about the scapegoating of Cousins, and there was a lot of stuff like week 2, it was Cousins' fault that he didn't coach up Daniel Carlson enough for him to make those field goals. Against the Bills, it was Cousins' fault for him not allowing Josh Allen to have an MVP-type game. And rush for 2 touchdowns. He did omit the fact that Cousins had those horrible turnovers early in the game, but that's kind of the crux of the argument. And I think, when the Cousins, anti-Cousins people, I hear a lot of the same narratives now, and I used to hear a lot of the same narratives before they brought him on. And I think it really boils down to 2 things right now, and that's the size of the contract, and that's the first thing. And going back to what you said about switching quarterbacks all the time, I think that we saw the financial penalty the Vikings had to pay to bring in a quarterback because they haven't been able to develop one in my entire lifetime. The two closest really being Dante Culpepper and Teddy, and both of them, strangely, were kind of cut down in their prime by knee injuries. So that just shows you how important it is to develop a young quarterback so you don't end up having to overpay in free agency for the most important position. And, even as a big Cousins guy, I understand that he got more money than he deserved, but that's kind of the market in the NFL right now. And so I get that's why people have unrealistic Super Bowl or bust expectations for him. I mean, you can't really live up to that sort of contract unless you're the league MVP, the Super Bowl MVP, so on and so forth.
As far as an offensive goes, Joe, you've got to have the consistency. I mean, I just said it a few minutes ago. You cannot keep changing quarterbacks and expect them to improve. You cannot keep changing offensive linemen and expect them to be a cohesive unit. If you keep retrenching and starting over, this is Diggs' fifth offensive coordinator. How many years has he been in the league for Stephon Diggs? It's amazing because you can't do it. You can't do it and expect to win. I mean, they win in New England because of what Brady and Belichick have been there for over a decade. They win in Green Bay partially because their quarterback's the same. They don't have a defense to go with it, and that's hurt them the last 5 years. But you win by getting consistent play from the same guys, and then you build them with chemistry around them, which we possibly have the opportunity to do between this with Cousins and the offense around him. All that line has to do is play together and protect him.
Yeah.
Cousins is going to look better this year with his receivers. He's going to know more about them, know more about him, and it will get better. But you can't do that if you say, let's start over. And I get a little frustrated. I know it's a win now league, and everybody's got to quick to get the next guy to improve. But if you don't build anything, like you said, develop quarterbacks, you're done. You're just done.
I get too that people, maybe that was part of the argument as well, is why switch from Case Keenum when he got you as far as he had, and maybe that's a little bit a hubris because the Vikings felt like, well, this is the baseline, right? What Keenum did was the baseline, but we could have that and more with a guy like Cousins because he can hit those guys down the field consistently, something that Keenum couldn't do. Or maybe we don't need to put him on a leash as much as Keenum was on a leash with like the two different options per play, and actually have a quarterback that can read defenses and audible and actually pick up yardage. Now, we also, one change in the offensive coordinator was based on some success that Shermer had. That was different, but outside of that, Turner, DiFilippo, even Stefanski a little bit since he's been quasi-replaced or amended, has been based on just stagnation and mediocrity at best. And so it is... I planned to do the scoop show this morning for 15 minutes, and of course it ended up going like 35 again, because these things are so nuanced and complicated that it's really hard to find one thing specifically and blame it on that. A really good example of that is actually an article that...
And you're kind of chatty, Joe.
Not me. I'm a man of very few words. I was giving a lot of yes or no answers, a lot of nonverbal cues. But a good example of that is an article by a new writer on Purple PTSD, Taylor Nichols, who basically had written an article a few months ago and has been polishing it as I accidentally was ignoring him because I have like 10 Twitter accounts for the sites about how basically the crux of it is how bad win-loss record is as an indicator of quality of play for a quarterback, because it's way more complicated than that. You have to look at the team surrounding him, the situations in each of those games, and a lot of people say, well, Cousins has like a 16% win percentage against teams with a 500 record. I think he's 5-25 as of last year. He won one game last year, and when something's that extreme, I get pointing to it. I do think it's a little more complicated than that. Taylor pointed out 8 different games within a parameter of like the team he was on was down by 17 points and it scored less than 20 before garbage time. And the point of it is in those 8 games, Cousins had an average of an 85 PFF grade out of 100, and a lot of big games, 450 yards, 3 touchdowns, no meltdowns really. And so, I mean, I did see
out of 100. It's not. It wasn't a QB quarterback rating of 158. It's out of 100.
PFF grades are, yeah, and they're weighted, I think, against the play. No, that's QBR, but it is 100, and it's just So an 85 out of 100 is pretty good. I mean, a lot of these games,
it is
450 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception, stuff like that. But I can also see last year where he kind of. I always go back to the big debate Luke and I had last offseason about Cousins and him talking about garbage time touchdowns and stat padding and our big disagreement on that. I saw where that was the case in some of the games with Cousins, but I also don't think it's as simple as that. I think it would have been hard for any offensive coordinator or quarterback to have success with that line and that running game or lack thereof. So just Cousins as a scapegoat, I don't like, especially considering some of the games he had.
He's from the Big Ten.
No, I mean, that's what it boils down to at the end of the day. I have it written down and circled.
Joe, I guess I would agree with you. I mean, if you're going to use garbage, you're going to take garbage time touchdowns and points and what have you, and put them against Cousins. You have to do that in every other ranking with every other quarterback in the league that you rank him against, because they all get them. They're all part of their stats, because it's hard to do that unless you go down and break everything down. I think it's an interesting idea to write this article from this perspective, because that ultimately, and Cousins said it, that's what I'm responsible for, is wins and losses. Well, he's only playing basically half the game. In every game there's mitigating circumstances, and that's, for me, that's the crux of what is troubling. And I'm not saying it's terrible, but it's troubling with all the numbers that are collected these days, because so many of the numbers have, like you said, nuance and mitigating circumstances, and this other thing about another team that's playing and how they might be playing, whether they're a good team and whether they're playing their best game, and what so many things. If you want to quantify all that, then maybe you can come to some objective numbering system and ranking for them. But it's really hard. And it's something I've learned from you. You talk about your dad and bringing you up in football. It's what he's always said. My dad has always said that you've got to consider the other team. That team is out there trying to win too. It's not like you're playing in a vacuum and Cousins is out there, throwing practice balls to nobody that's tackling him. So it's. You look at his numbers. Was 4,000 yards, 30 touchdowns versus 10 receptions last year. Objectively, you cannot argue with that. Are some of them garbage time? Yes. Is the ultimate goal of this game to win the game? Absolutely. Yeah. So some of that has to go on the quarterback's shoulders.
For sure.
You can't. And I'm glad Cousins realizes that. But I guess I don't know. Maybe the criticism should be, how is he doing in bringing his team, in actually winning a game here or there for his team. And I don't know how many times he did last year. He almost did it against Green Bay, and he should have. He set the team up to win, and Carlson missed the field goals. So what can you do? But
almost the Rams game. There was that fumble at the end of it, and the defense was horrible. I do want to just add to that, and you alluded to it too, is garbage time wouldn't exist if the defense was playing really well. It'd be a closer game. So if you're in a garbage time situation, especially in these scenarios that Taylor, you're basically getting blown out, and that's such a multifaceted issue in and of itself. But I kind of broke down Cousins' quarters, like the first 4 games, second 4 games. The first 4 games, his average QB rating was 103.7. The second, from week 4 to 8, was 100.5. The third quarter of the season was 92.6, and the fourth quarter of the season was 104.6. That's a pretty good QB rating for each one of those, and they basically were 500 each time, outside of being like 1-2-1 and 3-1 in the second quarter. So, I don't think it's all on Cousins. I think those numbers are relatively remarkable considering how the run game didn't exist and how bad. I wrote down a stat that the week of the Seahawks game, he had 120 passes with a defender within 2 yards of him, which was like 20 more than anyone else in the league at that point. And part of that's
amazing.
He can't escape, but they should have known that, and they should have seen that Berger was retiring and tried to limit those negative aspects. Well, I don't think they did.
But they didn't. Berger was retiring. Come on, you said they should have seen Berger retiring.
No, but they knew he retired, so they could have drafted a guard instead of a tackle and a cornerback if they were aware of Cousins' short.
Wasn't drafting a tackle designed to protect Cousins?
Yeah, no, I think they. Because they just signed Reif and Remmers to be their tackles. I think what they thought was they could get Hughes, and that there were 4 guards between Hughes and their pick in the second round, and they all got taken right in a row. I don't think they saw that coming. So O'Neal, I think O'Neal was a panic move, and it ended up working. But moving Remmers to guard was never the goal of that draft, and it clearly didn't work out.
It didn't work out, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes you said, I'm sure they've written down all kinds of scenarios, and maybe they threw the dice on this one. And you can blame them for gambling, but stuff doesn't exactly work out. The people aren't always there that you want. The draft doesn't fall like you want. People throw up smokescreen. Rick Spielman does it all the time. I mean, it's not perfect. I don't think you can just say they should have done this. And because they didn't do this, and just in hindsight, you make the move.
I just don't like the idea of signing the biggest contract ever and then knowing what the weaknesses are and then having the hubris to take a corner when you should have just been safe and either traded down and taken a guard.
Quarterback. And you said it earlier. They had to pay this money because that was the market. They had to do it. They did what they had to do.
I'm not upset about that. I'm just saying if you spend that money, you should protect the guy a little bit and not take that risk. It was just it was a very that risk didn't need to be taken. I guess I'm not going to nitpick all the other drafts because of the guys have all developed. I mean, they've had a really high hit rate for the defenders they've taken, so I can't really be mad about that. But I do think that this draft was kind of a clear sign of them making up for lost time in that regard, and so hopefully it works out. But at the same time, I never agreed with the.
For me, the bottom line on Cousins is, he's got the numbers. Fine, we should know, and we shouldn't keep having this argument. Not you and me per se, but
as a collective.
Football in general, that Cousins is no good and can't do it. He can make the plays. You've got to give him the tools with which to succeed, and then he should be judged on wins and losses. And I'm hopeful and optimistic that they have started to do that this season. They certainly concentrated on the offense in the draft. Mm-hmm. They shored up their defense for, hopefully it's going to last another year and another couple of years. And there's even, I heard talk about a potential extension for Harrison Smith, which I would love to see. But, at some point this defense is going to get too old as a collective group, and you got to start retooling that. And anyway, I think this year you should start looking, at wins and losses at Kirk Cousins, and he himself knows that. So
I agree. I completely agree with you. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt you at the end there, but I think that those excuses, if you want to call them excuses that I've been making and that we've been talking about, a lot of those have been taken care of this offseason. And so, I mean, I've talked about and joked about too, like how complete the roster is this year and how afraid I am for 2020. And I was pleased to see Courtney Cronin wrote a similar article to the one I wrote, so I don't feel like a crazy person screaming into my pillow.
I should have never pointed that out. So are you going to then shorten up the Big Ten in quotes rope that you're giving Cousins this year? Are you going to hold him accountable, or are you going to look for excuses and say no, he's a Big Ten quarterback? And all right,
well, I've said hold me to it because I've said that in writing, and I think I've said it on the show. Maybe I haven't. That this year is kind of a shut people up year, and those excuses won't be there.
Or fuel their fire.
I really don't feel like we kind of have like a point on the agenda to talk about 3 things that need to happen for the Vikings to make the playoffs. I mean, the main one is outside of like learning the offense and worrying about the corners in the first 4 games of the season because of Holton Hill and Mike Hughes being injured, and Xavier Rhodes already having some injuries apparently, is the offensive line gelling. And it sounds like from what you said about your time at minicamp that like there weren't any like false starts or bad snaps, which I mean they're not in pads or anything, but
that's a little overblown, but it is what I saw, and like I said, it's as good a thing as I could say about it because they're not playing against a team that's rushing them, they're not playing in pads, and they looked fine. They looked good for 2 people at the rear of the line who were in new positions. The new center Garrett Bradbury and Helfline we moved to guard. So I mean, it was more of a throwaway statement that at least there wasn't that. At least they weren't screwing up and So that's don't take too much.
Too late.
Take that with a grain of salt. Yeah, because it's OTA's mini camp. So they're going to take a while to gel. And I think.
And they're young.
I think everybody's pretty high on Bradbury. I think putting Elfline back to his original position or where he's more natural is a good idea. We'll see how. I don't know if Josh Klein is done or not, and see if O'Neal has a season where he's going to get it even better than he was last year, and see what we got left in Riley Reed. So there's still some question marks there, but like I said, for what it's worth. I
wonder,
weren't doing that.
I haven't really said this or anything, but at the back of my mind, I kept kind of hoping that Samia would take over at right guard because he's got a much higher ceiling than Klein does, and he played on the best line in the country last year, somehow outside of a Big Ten school. But now, as I'm talking to you and I'm thinking about it, I think Klein being a veteran, even though he's new to the team. And not playing like 3.5, 4 seasons since his last injury or whatever. I think having veterans on the line is going to be important, whether that's actively on the line or as a backup or whatever. I like the idea.
It's a great point, and I totally agree with you.
I like having Reef on one side and Klein on the other, as opposed to having all those rookies or second-year guys out there, or even the third-year guy. No, Klein play on the other side. The other point I want to make is
hopefully he can still play. That's the key for him. Yeah, I agree with you. Having him there is really important, but hopefully he can still play.
Yeah, the other point I want to make is, do you realize if the Vikings win the Super Bowl with Cousins that I will never shut up about Big Ten quarterbacks ever? You might want to consider that as you root for the team this season.
That's not exactly good.
The good news is, though,
there's a thorn with every rose, right? There's a thorn on every rose.
There's a Poison song about that, I think. The good news is, though, is if Cousins implodes, Favre is available. I can't believe, and we don't need to talk about that too much because it's just a funny aside, but I cannot believe that people actually took that seriously. Like, they didn't. I mean, I know some people questioned it, and it came from his official Instagram account, which apparently was hacked. But he's going to be 50, and it is Favre, but people were freaking out about it. And
all the pieces are in place.
Was he playing with the Hattiesburg high school guys again? I mean, the one thing is that is Favre, but the second thing is there's no way he would announce it this far before training camp. Like, he would wait until the 4th week of the preseason to do it. He's not going to get ready and go to training camp.
He'd wait until the 5th game because he can't play a whole year.
Man, another big.
But don't think that for a moment it got you a little bit excited. When you saw it.
Yeah, I mean, I had who was I talking to this week? Who we were talking about the Favre thing, which is one of my favorite, happiest times of my entire life, to be honest, and. Having that Favre jersey makes me happy, and having the Favre peeing on Wisconsin shirt I'm going to be buried in that. But they were basically saying if the Vikings would have won that Super Bowl in 2009, that the Packers would have forever had some sort of addendum or shit-talking point that we needed to go to Green Bay's best player to win. And I'm like, dude, I just want to win. I don't really care how. I mean, the Green Bay people, if we win a Super Bowl, they're just going to say, well, we have 5 more or whatever. It's not like they're going to just roll over and not find justification.
That is correct.
So it'll never get better.
It's just like politics today. Doesn't matter what you say. The other side's entrenched, and they will tear your side down with it, whatever they can, and they'll ignore the facts that are in front of them, and they will say this about that. So yes, if Vikings ever win the Super Bowl, they'll say, yeah, come talk to me when you got 4 more. So
yeah,
but whatever.
Speaking of it being entrenched in negativity for the sake of it, something that came up this morning that I really was interested in your take on was a writer from overthecap.com. I think his name was Jason Fitzgerald. I don't know where he said this off the top of my head. I don't remember. It doesn't matter. But he basically said that he felt like the Vikings cap situation was bad and was going to get worse, and that they were victims of emotional attachments, in that they used emotion over reason or performance to re-sign Barr, who's a mediocre linebacker that they didn't extend for a while because of his mediocrity. It was his point, not mine. And also the Kyle Rudolph being on the wrong side of his career, even though he's not even 30 years old yet. And that re-signing from an emotional or loyalty standpoint versus what makes the team better. And I hadn't heard that anywhere, and I know his job is to analyze the cap or whatever. I don't know what else Over the Cap does. But it was an interesting take in that it was different, and we've established that different takes are kind of the status quo right now. But at the same time, I just feel like that is not right. I mean, I'm not a big Barr guy, but I was happy he came back. They didn't have a lot of options after him. The same thing with Rudolph. I mean, he's not the world's best guy, but he's also very efficient and dangerous in the red zone, and so on and so forth. And so I feel like these national guys, Florio included, despite what he does on PA show, just don't have their finger on the pulse of what people think in each market, which would be impossible to do. But at the same time, that just seems objectively wrong to me. Like they're painting the wrong picture for what's going on.
It was an interesting piece. In fact, the thought occurred to me when they were signing Rudolph. Is this the right decision, or is this just do the Vikings want him because he's their guy, he's a great guy, and blah 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 blah. But you can go a number of different ways about it, because maybe there is something to that. There also, when I look at both Barr and Rudolph, first of all, Barr was the one that made the emotional decision to come back.
Yes.
He left. The Vikings let him go. Barr came back and said, "Oh, okay, we can get him for this. Let's get him."
And took less money. That's a great point. That's a really good point.
And Rudolph, I think Zimmer wanted him to be here. So I think Zimmer wants them both here for different reasons. He loves the intelligence of Barr on defense. That guy's basically the quarterback out there and does whatever
Aren't they both
Zimmer wants him to do. I believe so. And Rudolph is a leader, clearly a leader on the offense and in the locker room. Now, granted, that makes Zimmer's job easier. Does that mean should we criticize Zimmer for wanting these guys back because it'll make his, or this is really important. On the other side of the token, you got to also look at the advantage. Signing Kyle Rudolph helped them with their cap space. They cleared up $4 million more as a result of it.
Yeah, I was going to say that after
done. So I mean, you can look at it from 10,000 feet up and say, "Oh God, that looks bad." They're emotionally attached. But if you really dig down into the nuts and bolts of it, there are other reasons they went after these guys. Barr might not have always played the way us fans wanted him to, but I think for the most part, except for that one season, he played the way Zimmer wants him to, and he does a good job. He might not flash and splash and do everything that. Well, he did his rookie year, but he's still a very, very good player. And you said it earlier. What were the options behind him? Not that much. So that The other point of it, the only other negatives I would say, well, is this an easier way for the coach to keep coaching his teams, hanging on to these guys and not coaching up new leaders? But
yeah,
once again, I go back to the whole starting over thing. When you got somebody in place who can do the job that you need to get done, and needs to get done, and you've got someone, you got Rudolph who wanted to be here, and you got Barr who ultimately wanted to be here. There's some value there too. So you could say this about any team. I mean, go look and say, hey, they re-signed the guys. I mean, because of emotional attachment. Well, there's a lot more involved than that. They're good players too.
That was a very masterful response, honestly. That was like 10 different reasons why because you have to look at what you basically said was mitigating factors, and I think you have to look also where the team is, and in regards to starting over. They're not at the place right now where they want to coach up guys, and they do have a new tight end, but you don't know what's going to happen there. I've said a million times, tight ends take a while to acclimate to the league because of the physicality and speed of it. And at this point, outside of even the cap space and the fact that it did help them with Rudolph, and they can cut Rudolph after next season with really no penalty.
That's it.
It helped money-wise, but also they're just not in the position to add new things to this cog. I think you touched on this too. The fact that these guys wanted to be here, and Rudolph has talked a lot this week about wanting to be here, and the Patriots rumors, and even the way he announced it, and how much his family loves living here. All of that is part of it. But it talks about this team that I think I talked to Ian about this on the Odd Couple on Saturday. I'm not really used to that. Even for really any team in Minnesota to have that culture where players either want to stay here or free agents want to come here. You have a lot of experience. You used to work for the Timberwolves back in the 90s, and that's never been the case for them.
No.
Probably the exact opposite. I'm not a big baseball guy. Hockey, they've had some big free agents, and Parisi and what's his face, that defenseman they gave that 50-year contract to. But
Sutter.
Yeah, there's it's just a very cool situation to be in. The Barr thing blew my mind. I mean, it was a foregone conclusion that he was on the Jets. The terms were announced. I think you and I did a show that morning, or I did a show, and I think there was a guest host, and literally 10 minutes afterwards, the reversal was announced. That to me was a testament to, I mean, even with all the complaining I do, or people do about Spielman or Zimmer, which a lot of, you have to look at it as a whole, and I think that they built this really great organization, top-notch facilities outside of those panels falling off of the stadium, the best headquarters in the league, and it's not even 10% done with what they're going to do with that space. It's just a cool thing to be working with a team that is run so well, especially growing up like I did under Red McCombs, where it was just a complete nightmare. I think the team stayed at a Motel 6 and for their headquarters. It was brutal.
Nice.
You
have to look at it. That Rudolph contract is team friendly. Like you said it, you nailed it. They can move on to him. I really think this team is being built. They have a sense that they are in win now mode. I mean, they went all in on Kirk Cousins, needed a quarterback, and that was the thing that's put them over the hop. They've got this defense that's it's going to start aging here in a year or two. So it's win now. They've got they've got a great tandem at receivers. They're really built for winning now. I think Zimmer feels like he's got an offensive coaching staff that can really help him complement the defense. So I don't think that. Yeah, I don't think that you therefore then cast that aside and say see you later to one of your locker room leaders who can still play. You put them in a situation where the Vikings can cut them loose after 2 years or whatever and let them go. So like you said, next year scares you, but this year it's win now, and I think the Vikings in that regard are all in. So I don't have a big problem with it. So
and they'll be fine.
I don't think it's emotional. I think there might have been some emotion there. These people know each other, but I don't think that's the reason they did it.
I think it's like reason 5B.
Yes.
And these guys will be getting older, but a lot of them are signed till 2022, 2023. Cousins is only signed through next year. If for some reason it doesn't work, they're going to have a ton of cap space if he leaves to try to make another push, which I think is important. But I think that in talking to you, something that's occurred to me, that there's just seems to be a really big disconnect between the national media's thoughts on where the Vikings are now and their potential this season and where we are. And a lot of that,
I gotta tell you,
yes.
Before you make the point, I grew up in the '70s, and when the Vikings were king, and every stinking year, we got Sports Illustrated coming into my house, and they give their predictions for the season. Never did what the heck is his name? Legendary guy at Sports Illustrated. No, it wasn't Steve King. It was the other guy who just passed away a couple years ago. But he would never ever pick the Vikings to win the division. Didn't matter if they just went to the Super Bowl. He was always picking the Packers, always picking someone else. I can't believe I just hated this guy. And then when I went to the Super Bowl the first time it was here, I was standing right behind him in the media line, and I almost told him what I thought of him.
I vividly remember growing up with the Sports Illustrated subscription and waiting for that issue and always being pissed off when I got it.
Dr. Z, they call him. What was his
he
name?
did the power rankings for a while too, I think.
Yeah, he did everything. Anyway.
And I agree. I mean, I've talked about this take a little bit, and I think the caveat is that I was in treatment at the time. But one of the main reasons that I wanted Johnny Manziel on the Vikings was because I wanted ESPN to talk about them more, so I could see them on TV. Like, I was excited for the prospect of.
I remember you saying that, Joe. You can't say that stuff. Don't admit that.
I should
Johnny
not.
Manziel, come on, man.
I should not at all. But I mean,
Bobo's bad enough. And your dad paid me. He's paying me a stipend to not bring up Mobo in front of you on the air anymore.
He must be late on his check. That was. I've told that story a couple times how angry I was about that at the time. But that was one of the not the sole factor. I mean, he was very electric and amazing in college, but he had a ton of character flaws, obviously. But yeah, I'm totally used to that. But I do feel like a lot of the time, the local reaction is based on hope and things that aren't really objective or quantifiable. Even though we
and the national take is based on laziness,
maybe, or just not again having their finger on the pulse of what's going on, or like in this case, I think they're putting too much weight on what happened last season and writing the team off because of it. I don't think they see
that's good
what's going on. So I think it's a little different, but I'm totally used to it. I mean, we are in flyover country.
We all know Zimmer loves to be under the radar, so he should have no problem with that this year.
Bulletin board material, it's his jam. I think the last thing I wanted to talk about, which isn't that interesting. I mean, I'm super into this as a concept, and I mean, I grew up playing Sega Genesis, and my favorite game was QB Challenge when they used to do those awesome, and they've brought them back recently, but throwing at moving targets and who can throw the ball the farthest and all that. What's it called? 40 yards of gold competition with the 16 quote-unquote fastest guys in the NFL. And what I found interesting about that 16 is that 4 of them are connected to the Vikings, either substantially or in the past couple of years, with obviously Trey Waynes and Jeff Badette are going back and forth. And I like the quote this week from Badette. He said he told Waynes that Waynes has made enough money and let him win because he needs that money, which I thought was funny because it's a $1.1 million purse. But the other 2 are Jalen Myrick, who's a corner who played for the Gophers, Big Ten, who is super fast, and he was on the practice squad last year. And then Sinkfield, who came through the CFL and was a cornerback / wide receiver sort of thing the last couple in 16 and 17. And he was the guy that ran the unofficial 419 that people have said isn't real. Now, I don't think
who are these guys with?
I know that Myrick isn't signed with anybody, and he's really excited to do this because of that. And so I get what you mean. Like, if they're not currently playing for a team, how are they on the thing? That's a really good point. I know Myrick isn't. Sinkfield might be signed somewhere, but I'm interested to see. He's like the dark horse in the competition just because of that 419 that people argue about online all the time. But it made me think about how much the Vikings defense, obviously in the quarterback position, is predicated on size for their main guys and speed in general, considering all 4 of these guys are, except for Badette, so 3 of the 4 are corners, and I just thought that was an interesting caveat of it.
It'd be fun to watch. I guess that's all I care about. I don't think Waynes looks that fast, but that's because he's reacting and always got to cut. He can close quickly and stuff, but
he can't.
You don't really see his flat out speed like you do get the opportunity to see that with Badette in practice, which is a lot of fun. So I'd be surprised if Waynes is faster, but he might be, even though he's just never had the need to show it. So it's fun off-season novelty. When is it going to happen?
June 29th in Florida, so it's coming up. Some of the other guys are Ted Ginn Jr., who I used to love at Ohio State, another reference.
Too old.
Alvin, maybe in his prime. Alvin Kamara, I think, is the biggest name, and it'll be the most interesting. And then, Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie, who I think is pretty old. Marquise Goodwin, who's a wide receiver. The Jags, maybe, or he used to be. A couple other guys I've never heard of, a couple rookies. I think Ginn could have taken it in his prime, but we'll see. I think Badette might actually take it if he has. It's going to be 2-on-2, so it's going to be like a single race, single elimination. It's not like they're all lining up against each other. But I have a feeling this won't be the last time that they do this, so that should be fun.
Just so they don't pull a hamstring.
Yeah, wouldn't that be
the
biggest Vikings thing of all time? Well, man, for the first time, we actually said before the show we might not make it the hour, and then every time we go over the hour and laugh about a couple of blowhards we are. But we made it through. So keep an eye on these sites. We have a lot of new writers. We're covering a lot of different stuff right now of clearly a lot of value since I've been crapping on this time of season all show. We'll be back next Tuesday. Hopefully the video studio will be open within 2 weeks, and you can keep an eye on that. We'll be doing a lot more stuff in that regard. Training camp is coming, and we'll have at least 2 people there every single day, which will be really, really fun. You'll be there every day. I'm hoping to potentially get access for a photographer that would take professional shots of camp, and then we could use that to launch our Instagram, as that's the one thing that we're totally lacking on is our Instagram in regards to being a fully functioning company. But just point being, there's a lot of exciting stuff going on, and I did again want to say thank you to everybody who is new to the show, who's listening to us through iHeartRadio. That it does mean a lot to us because we do, despite all evidence to the contrary, put a lot of thought and time into this show, and we've been doing it for a long time, and we've always really strongly believed in it. And so that validation is super nice, and it's really going to my head. So look out, everybody. But thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week, Tuesday or Wednesday. And this has been Morning Joe's for Wednesday, June 19th. Skol.